I don't shut up, Michael. That's my problem.
I can see Jason trying to word very carefully.
He knows it's all out of love. I don't. I am regularly told to shut up, and thoroughly should be, Michael.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Escape Pod, Escape Technology's new series of podcasts. This is Escape Pod episode 4. Today we'll be talking about remote support and remote technical support services for content creation studios and visual effects studios. As usual, I'll require some help and support from some colleagues. I'm joined by Mr. Lee Danskin, our Chief Technical Officer, and by Rob Drury, our Engineering Manager, who is, from a day-to-day point of view, responsible for delivering our support services to studio customers. And our special guest this afternoon is Mr. Michael Illingworth of VineFX.
Hey, Jason, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us.
No problem.
And I think what we'd like to do, first of all, is just cover a little bit about who Vine are. And if you could give us a little bit of history about Vine as a business, the type of projects that you work on, and maybe some of the technology that you use to deliver those, just so we get a sense of kind of who you are and what your support requirements are.
Yeah, sure. VineFX is my company. It started in 2007. We're a visual effects facility, but we sort of had many guises, from having a big studio on Berners Street in London to operating out of Leavesden Studios, doing in-house stuff for Harry Potter, Fantastic Beasts. And also at certain points, we've operated out of cutting rooms on individual shows, doing shows like Crazy Head, Merlin in the past, and a few others. At the moment, we currently operate out of Cambridge, where I've lived for the last 20 years.
Okay, and so, I mean, from what you're saying, it sounds like most of your projects are of a long form nature. So it's more drama, TV and film than it is sort of short form.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So we have done feature films in the past, but at the moment, the majority of the work that we do is episodic TV work. We are doing some other projects which are non-visual effects based, which are building assets for Microsoft for a particular project that we're working on. But the majority of the stuff is visual effects, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, and you talked about Cambridge there. So that's quite an interesting part of the conversation, because we're obviously, the focus here is remote support and technical support. Now, you had been London-based, but then talk to us a little bit about what pushed you to move out to Cambridge. I mean, obviously, you've mentioned you lived there, but it must have been, you must have needed to give that some thought in terms of bringing artists into a setup that was Cambridge-based.
Yeah, as I said, I've lived here for 20-odd years, and I've always commuted into central London. I've always sort of enjoyed working in London, especially when I was younger, and sort of had less commitments. But as I sort of progressed, it was a place I always enjoyed leaving. So I always like getting out of London, getting to somewhere where it's a bit greener and sort of there's a bit more space. And I was drawn to Cambridge because my wife was working up here. So we sort of decided on Cambridge as a place where we wanted to settle. The reason the company moved it was, I'd like to say that there was a moment where I made that decision, but it was more organic. I was commuting into London, and I thought I just want to sort of take a bit of time out. So I hired a one-man room up in Cambridge. I took my flame, which I've had for a good 12 years. And I just started about picking up shots on little productions. This was about 3 years ago. And fortunately, I do have a skill which is doing compositing. So I'm able to pick stuff up, and Vine can operate just as me if I need to. The great thing was that, as things bobbed along, we sort of picked up a couple of projects, and we took on a few compositors. And then I worked with some artists that I've worked with in the past who helped us on shows like Patrick Melrose. We did Troy and a couple of other bits and bobs. And then we got a contract which was War of the Worlds. And so we had to expand the team. And that was the moment I decided to put some roots down in Cambridge. So we've always worked with Escape, and we then sort of went to Lee and yourself, Jason, and said, okay, we need to buy some kit. We need some bits and bobs. And we've been here now for a good 12 months operating as a larger, more permanent facility in Cambridge.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. I mean, I think we've had a few conversations like this on the podcast series so far, and lots of that naturally has focused on the pandemic scenario and how that's forced people to make certain decisions.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing here about the remote support component is that you made that decision before that came into play, because you'd already moved out of London, and presumably that meant that you had to consider, could you be technically supported at a non-London location, essentially?
I think that was never a question for myself. We've been working with Escape Technology since, I think it was 2013. I do think we may have been one of your first customers, or one of the first customers.
It goes back a long time, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And a big part of that arrangement was always a remote support. So we always realized that we didn't always necessarily need to have someone in the office for it to work. I mean, we've been using these tools for years now, and sort of, if you can get someone on hand within a really short space of time to fix something and look at something, then that's great for us. And then we can go quiet for a bit of time and not need anything. And that's the beauty of the support contract that we had. Again, when we sort of moved to a more permanent office here in Cambridge, it was never a question. It was always a case of, well, this works. And the great addition that's come whilst we've been here is you guys have offered a day of support on site as well, which obviously prior to the lockdown has always been really useful. Yeah, it was never a worry for me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to know. And I mean, just playing devil's advocate for a second, why use an external support partner? Why not employ an engineer?
I sort of got pictures of me sat in my room when I was playing with my Flame when I first moved to Cambridge, and that the idea of having a support guy in the same room would have been quite comical. It's the ability to expand and contract to what I need at the time. As I've said, I've always in the past been project based, and the idea that we could then be 2 or 3 compositors in a room and a matte painter, or like we are at the moment, we're sort of 23, 24 strong and a full team. It's flexible, so that's the main reason, is I need that flexibility. I like the idea of being able to expand and contract as I need to, and that fits with using a third party.
Yeah, it fits the nature of your business, essentially, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think whilst studios can employ engineering or administrator teams or individuals, you then have a responsibility to those members of staff once they're on your books, and that might not necessarily flex in quite the same way as as the rest of your business in terms of projects that go up and down in terms of volume. So yeah, I can see the sense in that. So then, what size team are you currently? Vine currently, as we speak now, is how many artists, and what sort of
As I've mentioned on LinkedIn, we are 100% remote at the moment for obvious reasons, and the team is as big as it's ever been. We're up at sort of 24, 25 artists, I believe, and that's majority of that is doing visual effects. But we've got a nice little team working with Microsoft, who have a research facility here in Cambridge. So we're doing a nice little project for them, which is not dependent on filming.
Right. Okay. And in terms of those artists you've mentioned, what applications, what technology are those people using?
So we've got compositors who are working with Nuke. We have been dealing with the Flame artist from time to time. On the 3D side, we're using Maya, Arnold, and we're also using ZBrush and all lots of various other modeling production tools, as well as a bit of software which we use for making clothes as well. Is it Marvelous Designer? Yeah, so a nice little variety. And then on the production side, our team are using Shotgun to keep everything coordinated.
So what about the sort of the distribution of those people geographically? Because that's quite interesting, isn't it? You've got artists in various places. They're not, it's not just the case that they're not in London. I think some of them are not even in the UK. Is that right? Yeah,
that's right. So as I said, when we moved to Cambridge and the team started to expand, there's a couple of artists I always enjoyed working with when I was in central London, and sort of we had conversations early on saying, do you fancy moving to Cambridge? And no was the answer. So we tried to work out a system that we could get them working remotely. So we've been looking at this for quite some time. So we've tried every sort of system, from sort of shuffling stuff up to Google, or Dropbox or whatever, them downloading it and working on the files and then sending them back. So we sort of, to come back to your question, we sort of decided early on to sort of go with a Teradici solution. But that meant once we got that system up and running, there's some artists that we've worked with in the past, both in the UK, who've moved back to places like Greece, Bulgaria, France. I think our animator last year was in Australia, and then places around the UK like Guildford and Rugby. So yeah, we're here, there, and everywhere.
Yeah, so it's a pretty global distribution of talent, isn't it? Which means that you've got quite a lot of freedom in terms of where you recruit and who you hire and where they're based.
Yeah, that's always the case. We just go for the people we like working with, and people who we go for the talent. Yeah, we're sort of not restricted by geography.
Yeah, it's nice to think that the technology starts to enable really human choices, which is, the technology offers a flexibility that gives you the ability to take whatever talent wherever it might be. Yeah. So let's just, before we move on to the technical guys at Escape and ask them some questions, I just, it's fair to say, isn't it, that you were in this position where you were set up for remote working before the pandemic crisis emerged.
We're very comfortable with the working approach, which I won't go into the details just yet, but it basically meant that we could have a machine in the office, and then it didn't matter where the artists were, but they would have a machine that was in our machine room. They would have access to our entire storage if they needed to, and entire access to our render farm. So there was no sort of having to split things off into different computers based in different locations. It was all centralized back in Cambridge.
Yeah, and so as the COVID-19 crisis started to emerge and deepen, what was your perspective on that with respect to Vine as it started to come to a head? Was it just the case that you were fairly relaxed insofar as you knew you were set up to cope with that? Were there any changes that you felt you needed to make? Was there anything that concerned you as that started to emerge?
There was a sense that something was coming and that we should get ready for it. And I sort of just made the decision late one night, and I sort of sent a message around to the team saying, look, okay, as of tomorrow, we're all working from home. And I think there was a natural pause in our production, and it felt like, okay, if we do this in a 2 or 3 weeks time, we're really going to be struggling with our particular delivery. So let's just get everybody shuffled off. One aspect of the solution that we were using, which is the Teradici, we had Teradici boxes underneath everybody's desk. I've always had this sort of ideal scenario that we'd have this beautifully silent studio without the whir and sort of hum of lots of desktop computers underneath everybody's desk. So that was sort of, we'd got that working internally, but then I realized, okay, the same technology, we can just send people home. So there was a little bit of me loading the car up with monitors and Teradici boxes and keyboards, mouse and tablet. But in the space of about a day and a half, we managed to get everybody up and working remotely, which was, I was expecting more problems, but the basis of what we needed was up and running within a couple of days.
I think so the last question then, really, and you sort of already answered this, is before we kind of talk to Rob and Lee about this a little bit, but you said you didn't really have any concerns about getting remote support and being supported, given that you were A, going to be locked down, and B, all the artists were remote already. You'd sort of trial run that, and it was all good.
Yeah, we kind of knew what we were doing. So we use Slack in the office as well. That's another sort of a little tool that we use. It's a bit more sort of direct than email. So we were, the comical thing last year was that we'd be chatting to someone in Australia at one point on Slack, and then we'd be chatting to the other person at the other side of the room with exactly the same sort of means of communication. So I'd sort of be like, hey, Ped, how you doing? And then, hey, Brett, how are you doing? And one's at the other side of the world, and the other's, sort of 10 foot away from you. So yeah, rather than get up and actually speak to people in the office, we decided that, you can sort of put your headphones on and hide behind your desk and not have to speak to anybody. Sorry, no, that's not entirely true. But yeah, we were sort of very comfortable with our means of communication, as well as the fact that the machines would work, and it was, the boundaries, the geographical boundaries weren't an issue.
Good, great stuff. So this is a question for Rob, bringing Rob into the discussion a little bit. Rob, you're our engineering manager, so your role is, well, tell me what your role is. That might be best. What does your day-to-day work look like from a support point of view?
As you mentioned, I'm the engineering manager. I look after a team of about 10 engineers at the moment. We seem to be expanding with the amount of customers that we look after, which ranges from quite small one-man bands through to medium to large scale customers.
So why did Escape Technologies start offering support services in the first place? I mean, why is it that the support team has become such a major focus?
Well, initially, it actually, funnily enough, started with Michael. He was one of our first support customers, and initially started with just Lee and Ant, and we've grown from there quite exponentially. Michael had asked us to go in as a technology partner to go and advise on things, and I think it grew into actually installing, maintaining and supporting all of the technology that we'd installed. And that's where we've tried to go from there, is not just providing support for customers, but as I said, working as a technology partner on where they should be going.
So tell me, why does a studio decide to choose Escape Tech as a support provider, do you think?
From my perspective, we have a plethora of knowledge ranging over all of our engineers. And I guess from a financial point for a studio, hiring what is essentially the salary of a single engineer and getting the experience of 10 engineers from Escape is it's a pretty attractive prospect.
And do you think there are, are we talking about studios of different sizes here having different views on whether they want to employ people directly or not?
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of it is down to project work and having somebody on site to be constantly doing that for the entire working week. Whereas I guess the way that we support different customers is different. Some people do want just the sort of reactive support that we give, and some do want the project based. So I guess, we've said to a couple of our clients in the past that, you're probably at the point now where you could hire a full-time engineer, and some of them have, and some of them have kept us on because they like what we provide as a support department. Yeah, and the spread of expertise. Mm.
So how is that? Just give me an insight into how things have changed. Obviously, you had an array of support clients pre-lockdown, many of whom you were visiting on site with some regularity, and many of whom had contracts that where that was a built-in component, a certain amount of on-site time. What was the thought process around how that would be managed with these reductions in our ability to move around freely?
Well, initially, it was obviously took a lot of thought of how we were going to provide any site visits as they were before. We've now turned to remote site visits, which are scheduled in as they would have been previously, but it's more a case of spending that time dedicated to doing any project work for that customer.
Okay, and Lee, what's your view on that in terms of the way that the support team was going to run and going to work with a greater emphasis on remote support? How did you see all that shaping up?
Well, the nice part is that the business was in process with that already. The remote working aspect of it was sort of semi in place, and Robert organised a really elegant schedule for sort of bouncing people through each part of the process. The nice part now is that, well, we're all remote and we've got all the necessary parts in place. So we use a lot of remote software, and we've got the licenses for that we've been utilising from day one. All of the businesses that we work with, we have some sort of remote access at a VPN level all the way through TeamViewer. We've even got dedicated hardware in certain locations that we do test work for people. So I think the business was in a good place anyway. It just sort of forced a lot of it to happen a lot quicker.
Well, I guess from that perspective, you can say a lot of our work was done remotely anyway. A lot of the reactive support we do is done through TeamViewer or VPNs. So it was only really the site visits that we needed to shimmy around a bit to get.
Yeah. Okay. So could you give me an insight into, how you, because I think there's two types of work there, right? There's sort of ongoing support. What you used an interesting phrase there, Rob, which is reactive support, which I assume what you mean by that is something's gone wrong and there's a problem and it needs an immediate reaction.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas there are other types of work that are more proactive in terms of what you might call sort of project work or maintenance, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when when we onboard a customer or when somebody renews a support contract, we try and sort of have an outline of where they'd like to go and what they'd like to get set up and installed. And obviously we have some suggestions as well for monitoring things that we put in place. And from a project standpoint, it's a lot easier to do when you're on site and can focus on just doing that rather than, like you said, the reactive support, which is more, thing doesn't work, I need it up and running as soon as possible.
Lee, have you found that that Escape's level of support engagement with studios has changed since the introduction of the lockdown? Have you found that you've done more work overall for the support clients, or has it tailed off? What's been the impact of that?
It's actually made us, from a technical point of view, we do the same day to day, whether we were on-prem or not. I mean, we always want to make sure that the thing works, right down to the desktop and the application, even, down to the Wacom working. So it's been a lot more dialogue between us and the customer. Often it's, could you reboot and you're going to have to let me back on? And we did a lot of that beforehand, but now it's even, with contending with people's home networking scenarios as well, has meant a lot more dialogue and a lot more investigation into what you would expect normally to be taken care of at some level. So we are doing a lot more of that. We are doing a lot more application help now as well. Primarily purely because people are actually either working on their own system or whatever they're doing. So, but generally it's been pretty much the same.
There's quite an interesting comment there about people's domestic broadband. I think could you dive into a little bit more detail on that? I mean, what have you found in terms of the differences and what have you had to get involved in and troubleshoot where that's concerned?
So, we've gone from one extreme to the other. We've got people that have been accessing their broadband on, like 4G and 5G wireless systems from people like Vodafone and those type of solutions, which obviously come with certain issues with latency. We've got right through to the other end of the spectrum where someone's had a home broadband connection and they're trying to switch to a business broadband connection because they're tired of their dynamic IP address. Trying to get from that dynamic IP address to a fixed IP address makes such a difference. It's been a massive learning curve for a lot of people. So the whole bandwidth issue and the VPN issue and the performance of all that's really fundamentally become, much more opaque in a lot of people's eyes.
Yeah. Okay. So, the other interesting thing is this collision of business and domestic, which is that under the lockdown circumstances, people have got children at home using what would be a portion of the domestic bandwidth provision. And you may have artists that are trying to work, visual effects artists at home, trying to work within that same framework. I mean, Michael, have you found that any of your artists working remotely have had to field that problem? Have they had problems with their own, domestic bandwidth capabilities?
On the whole, I think our artists' domestic bandwidth has been okay, where they have dropouts and they have moments where their sort of monitors go pixelated. Like Lee mentioned, it was mainly the people's IPs changing. I get about 5 of these every week. So you get a sheepish little comment on Slack saying, my IP's changed. Can you update that? And, we update the IP and they're straight back on again. So, yes, I can see that at certain points of the day, I think people lose bandwidth. I was going to say people come home from school because they're not even doing that, are they? But there are moments in the day where we tend to get a few issues and they all happen at the same time.
I think that's the picture that's emerging here. Have you found that the lockdown has that changed the amount of support you've needed from Escape as a support partner?
Yeah, it's sort of interesting what Rob said. I think he will agree with me when I say a lot of what I've been requesting at the moment is that sort of emergency of, oh goodness, something's completely broken and I don't know what to do. Can you sort of jump on it? And 9 times out of 10, that's often the case with Escape. They can sort of jump on it, or someone can stop what they're doing and they can kind of deal with my rather sort of panicky requests. Some of the longer term projects that we were in discussion with Lee and Rob, we've had to park. I think we just want the most stable and the safest environment for our artists to work in. The fancy bells and whistles can come later down the line.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. I wondered whether the emphasis had changed slightly, and it sounds like it has in terms of, Rob spoke of that division between sort of, reactive support and ongoing maintenance and project work, and presumably some of the project work you're happy at the moment for that to take a back seat, just in order to ensure that the work of the studio is ongoing and and running correctly.
I think we all know that sort of the niceties that we bring into our pipeline and the things that we request often bring lots of efficiencies, and I think they're always good to keep an eye on those and sort of keep talking about those. But at the same time, we just need it to keep running and maintain it.
Do you find it advantageous? We talked about the value of a third party support resource rather than employing someone directly. I mean, do you think that there's value in having the Escape team is 10 engineers or so, the wider array of expertise across different individuals? Do you think that served you well?
Yeah, definitely. I've worked at some big companies like CineSite and Mill Film and The Mill in the past, and I always knew which engineer was best at a certain type of work. And I do know, because I've worked with Escape for so long, there are certain strengths with certain people.
It's more about, Michael, coming to us who you like to talk to about which issue, but we also know internally, as the engineering manager, I love that we have such a great set of strengths between all of the engineers, and both Michael knows and I will know as well who would be the best person for that job, and that's having such a broad range of talents within the team is such a great thing for all of us, for our customers, and for me as well.
Yeah, and I think that sort of fits. I mean, you have got quite a few support engineers, and that suits us down to the ground. And there's often little threads running, so there'll be a certain thing that's, I don't know, Maya base, and we'll need to get some hand on that, some help on that. And there'll be someone who's really good with the farm, and then we can always sort of pick up a support ticket with a certain person who's great at getting the farm back up and running if it's broken. Or I think the fact that there are multiple people there gives us the benefit.
That must be one of the benefits of having a team at your disposal, rather than a smaller number if you were employing directly. But
I guess also that it sort of comes full circle about why you asked me, why did I sort of take a support contract with Escape? And I think that was probably one of the main features way back when. I was always, if we'd have advertised for a single engineer, you would have been taking an engineer from one of the established facilities for one. And it's not just the support, but it's that one eye on what we need moving forward. So I think I've got an old Teradici card that Lee lent to me back in 2016, and I think I probably need to return that at some point. Apologies, Lee. But,
I'm sure it's been useful.
But you were telling me this was the future back in 2016, and I was like, okay. I was based in central London at the time. I had no need from it. And then I sort of always remembered the conversations we'd had. We sort of tested it, and I was like, yep, looks great. I don't know why I need it, because I'm in a room, I've got my machine under my desk, and what is the point? And then sort of 4 years later, I'm in this situation, and I'm sort of counting my blessings that it works as it was advertised. And I think that's the case moving forward to stuff that's on the horizon. I think, you have one engineer in the office, and that's one person's opinion, but I don't want one person's opinion. I want 10 people's opinion, and I'll make the decision on what I think's best for me. And it's just nice to know what's further down the line. And then that's backed up with, well, does this work? Well, yeah, we've got it in 3 facilities and it's working out already. So you've got that confidence that it's going to be okay. I think that was the other thing that was apparent at the start of the lockdown is, I didn't quite know how to get my production Macs up and running. So I sort of spoke to Rob on the phone, and he said, well, I'll tell you what, I've set up 3 VPNs this morning, set up a VPN. And that should be fine for your coordinators. So it was that combined knowledge of dealing with lots of people maybe panicking at the same time that we benefited from that combined wealth of knowledge.
Well, it was quite interesting at the beginning of the pandemic that we had all of our basically every single one of our customers email and say, I need to set up all of my workers remotely, as you can imagine. And, that puts you in a position where you're dealing with like 5 different types of firewall or routers. And, whilst the theory is the same of setting up a VPN, it's ever so slightly different. So it was a very interesting, for us, the great thing about working with loads of different companies as well is that we get more hands-on experience with different types of technology that we might not have used as something that we would suggest.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Rob. Actually, you're thrown into having to deal with bits of technology that we didn't supply, that are in place, that you need to understand in order to get something else to work that we're trying to support and install and troubleshoot. It's a bit of a baptism by fire for you guys quite a lot of the time, isn't it, really?
Yeah, absolutely. But I honestly think that makes us better engineers. Sort of going in, having to quickly, from first principles, figure out what's going on, what needs to change, where the documentation is for the bit of hardware, software that we're trying to troubleshoot, and reach a resolution as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and I guess that you would have done. Yeah, it's an aspect of onboarding a support customer, isn't it? Is it not that you survey first and take a kind of inventory of everything that's in place? Yeah,
we try and do a tech audit as much as we can. Obviously, with some customers, it's we have different levels of support contracts. Some of them it's more relevant what we're supporting, but there are a few customers we have that have an MSP IT consultant that they're working with that deal with a lot of the network stuff, and we're just there to deal with the software or the render farm. And we'll take our technical audit as to the parts that we're meant to be looking after, but that's not to say down the line that we can't then expand that into looking after everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I think we're kind of drawing to a close here, guys, but I have a couple of sort of future tense questions for everybody, really. I mean, Michael, particularly, what about the future for Vine in terms of you were already working remotely. So this question, we've had some interesting answers to this question from other studios on the podcast. But do you think that the lockdown and what it's forced people to do technically, and even in terms of their working practices, do you think that's is there going to be a legacy that remains from that when restrictions ease? What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. We're far more relaxed about people working from home. Maybe because we're all going through the same situation. People are sort of quite conscientious. I don't know. But every one of my staff has delighted me in a sense of everybody's pulled together and everyone's conscientious. Everyone's at home trying to look after little kids and sort of different dynamics that we've got to deal with. So there's a natural flexibility we need to have with all of our staff, and we're all going through this together. So I think some of our staff might go to working remotely, and I'll be fine with that, and we will be employing more remote artists, and I'll be fine with that as well. I think lots of good stuff is going to come from this. Obviously it's a situation that's difficult for everyone, but I think we've all changed the way we work, and some of it for the better.
Yeah, and what's your opinion on the kind of state of the VFX industry in the wider sense? Then, I mean, we're obviously aware of the fact that shoots are not happening at the minute because of the lockdown. And is your view that once that restriction eases, that the work will start to climb back up again? What do you think?
The industry has lots of natural gaps in it. It's just the nature of the work. It's project driven. Some projects last longer than others. It's going to be tough. I'll be honest with you. And I would be lying if I said I wasn't worried. So we've got projects in. We will keep those going for as long as possible. But hopefully, once people come back to filming, then we can sort of speak with our partners and see if they can bring stuff through a little bit earlier. And see what we can do to get ourselves back up and running. Yeah.
Well, I think you're in a very, very good position to manage the tough times, as it were, given that you've got such a successful remote setup. Lee, what do you think about supporting people remotely going forward? Is that something you expect to be doing more of as the restrictions ease a little bit?
Absolutely. I mean, it's all out of the bag now. All bets are off. We've had companies from Michael's size all the way up to conversations that I've been having where they've got thousands of staff working remotely. It's the new norm is the way that I'm going to view it from now on. We always had those small ones where there might be some grading artist that only works from the south of France because he likes the flavour of wine down there. You know, there was always those odd.
That's a totally reasonable position to take, by the way.
Exactly.
How do I get that job?
Yeah, this is it. I want that job. But, you know, there was always an instance where someone would want it. But now it's the norm. And us working remotely, you know, the more that we move towards, you know, co-location, which Michael looked at early on, and, you know, that might become the norm for a lot more businesses. We've obviously been dealing with a lot of cloud customers recently with our Sherpa product. So that's all remote. There is no physical on-premises at all. And we've got a lot of people that we're working with. I've never met them. I've never shook their hand. And we're doing major work for them. So I see it more and more the norm.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting point in the sense that I think a support services as delivered by Escape Technology and numerous other businesses, I think clients are going to ask more explicitly than they ever did before. What can you do remotely? How much of this can you do remotely? In a situation where you couldn't physically come on site, can you still support us? I think people didn't really ask that question before because they didn't expect to be in that situation. But now we've all been through this. Everybody's aware that it could happen a second time, I suppose.
Absolutely. I think, you know, it's like I say, it is now just the norm, and, you know, dealing with remote stuff. And I think everybody's attitude and the way that people are viewing the work, because it's now more of a collaborative exercise. People know that they've got to work from home for a whole set of different reasons, but therefore they're way more flexible. And not only that, but the employers, you know, the amount of conference calls, Zoom calls that I've seen where you've got kids jumping up and down or bouncing around, the tolerance of what you would call business has changed. This is it. I try not to, but, you know.
Well, you and I were on a call together not so long ago with one of our partners, and my 4-year-old son had a total meltdown in the background, and everybody laughed, didn't they?
Exactly. Exactly that.
A new thing, hasn't it? A new trope that we have to deal with, you know.
And I think that gives us a lovely little bit of comedy moments through the day that, you know, you just don't expect, but you just take it on board now and people accept it. And I think that's really been, you know, a nice part of actually doing what we've gone through. You know, I mean, Michael was plugging in cables for Tim, one of our engineers, and, you know, Michael was sending him pictures of, am I plugging this in the right, you know, that type of workflow. And there's nothing wrong with it. And it was so understanding. It was just like, which one? Take a picture. Perfect.
It was instantaneous. There's a picture of my switch with my finger in front of the port. And you know, so if you send the picture, this one, and then you get a reply back saying, yes, it works. It's sort of.
But it's interesting support in this current day and age where we do have, like, you know, sending an image. Not long ago would have been such this might take a while to figure out. But, you know, using Zoom or using TeamViewer, we can be on somebody's machine guiding them through, even if we're not typing out the commands. We've got so many different ways to access machines and, you know, out-of-band management on servers and things. The technology is so amazing that's enabling us to even do the support stuff, let alone the remote work that Michael's workers are doing.
Yeah, interesting. Well, look, guys, that's I think that's about all we've got time for. That's been a really interesting discussion. I think we've covered pretty much everything that topic has to offer, I hope. Just remains for me to say thank you to both Lee and Rob for their contributions, and a very, very special thank you to Michael. Michael, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed listening. Please, if you're interested in any of the technology that we've been discussing, see the links below, and we look forward to the next episode in our podcast series. We hope to see you log in then. Thank you very much, and goodbye.